Right now, deep inside your body, a silent war is raging. Every second, millions of your own cells commit suicide. They do this to protect you, sacrificing themselves the moment they detect a mistake in their own genetic code. But eventually, one cell will refuse to die. It will ignore the chemical signals ordering it to stop growing. It will decide that it is more important than the body it inhabits. We call this cancer, and we treat it like a disease, like a foreign invader. But that is a comforting lie. Cancer is not an infection. It is a rebellion. It is your own biology trying to evolve into something new, something immortal, even if it has to kill you to do it. You likely perceive yourself as a single, unified consciousness looking out from behind your eyes, but that sense of oneness is a biological hallucination. In reality, you are a sprawling, overcrowded metropolis built from 30 trillion individual citizens, each with a specific job and a terrifyingly short lifespan. These citizens are your cells, and for billions of years, they have adhered to a strict, non-negotiable treaty that keeps you alive. They suppress their own ancient desire to reproduce endlessly, trading their individual freedom for the safety of the colony. This is the grand bargain of multicellular life, a pact written in blood and protein that demands total obedience for the greater good. Without this aggressive suppression of self, the structure of the human form would dissolve into a chaotic sludge of competing organisms. To maintain this order, your body operates not as a democracy, but as a ruthless totalitarian state where the penalty for stepping out of line is immediate execution. Every cell must check in with its neighbors constantly, broadcasting chemical signals that prove it belongs and is following the rules. If a cell stops working, or if it tries to divide without explicit orders from the central command, the immune system dispatches death squads to liquidate it. Even more disturbing is the built-in kill switch found in every single nucleus, a mechanism called apoptosis. If a cell notices its own DNA is damaged, it is programmed to dismantle itself from the inside out, shrinking and breaking apart so it can be eaten by its peers. This is the price of admission for complex life, the willingness to die on command so the whole can survive. This level of cooperation is an evolutionary anomaly, considering that for the vast majority of Earth's history, life was solitary, selfish, and microscopic. Your distant ancestors were single-celled organisms that fought tooth and nail for every scrap of glucose, reproducing as fast as they could before something ate them. That drive to multiply at all costs is the default setting of biology, the primal directive burned into the deepest layers of the genetic code. Multicellularity is merely a fragile overlay, a suppression of those old instincts, like a thin layer of ice over a deep, dark ocean. The cells that make up your liver and lungs have not forgotten how to be selfish. They're simply being held in check by the chemical handcuffs of the collective. But biology is messy, and the machinery of replication is never perfect, meaning that every time a cell divides, there's a tiny chance for a typo in the instruction manual. Most of these errors are harmless or fatal to the cell, but eventually, the wrong combination of mutations strikes the jackpot. A specific gene breaks, perhaps the one responsible for the kill switch or the one that listens to the stop growing signal. Suddenly, you have a cell that has deafened itself to the screaming protests of the society around it. It essentially unlearns the social contract and reverts to that billion-year-old mindset of the solitary hunter. It looks at the orderly structure of your tissues and sees nothing but resources to be plundered for its own expansion. This is the moment a cell ceases to be you and becomes a distinct, parasitic entity living within your borders. It is an anarchist throwing a brick through the window of a government building, sparking a riot that refuses to be contained. Unlike a virus or a bacterium, which are clearly foreign invaders with different surface markers, this enemy wears your face and speaks your language. It holds the security clearance to bypass your body's defenses because it was born from the same stem cells that built your heart and brain. The immune system often swims right past it, failing to recognize the monster because the monster looks exactly like the civilians it is preparing to slaughter. Once the rebellion takes hold, the rogue cell begins to build its own infrastructure, hijacking the body as supply lines to feed its growing army. It sends out chemical lies that trick the body into growing new blood vessels directly into the tumor, a process that is essentially the host paving the road for its own executioner. The tumor consumes glucose and oxygen at a voracious rate, starving the healthy tissues nearby and forcing them to wither away. It has no long-term plan, no concept of the future, and no care for the fact that its victory guarantees its own destruction. It is driven by a blind, mechanical optimism that says more is better, pushing against the physical limits of the organ it occupies until the pressure becomes unbearable. This is what makes cancer so uniquely terrifying compared to any other biological threat we face. It is not an accident or a simple breakdown of machinery. It is a successful evolutionary strategy played out on the wrong scale. The cancer cell is winning the game of natural selection, outcompeting its neighbors, adapting to scarce resources, and surviving attacks from the immune system. In a twisted sense, it is more fit than the healthy cells around it because it has shed the burden of cooperation. It is a biological super soldier that has gone rogue, using the very strength and resilience meant to keep you alive to bring about your demise. We like to think of our bodies as temples, impenetrable fortresses of self, but the existence of cancer proves that we are merely temporary coalitions. The social contract that binds our 30 trillion cells is always one mutation away from collapsing into civil war. Every day you wake up healthy, it is only because the totalitarian regime inside you successfully assassinated the dissidents before they could organize. But the rebellion is always waiting, lurking in the probability of the next cell division, ready to reclaim the ancient right to reproduce without permission. We are not a single solid unit. We are a crowded room where everyone is polite until the lights go out. To understand why this rebellion is so difficult to stop, we have to realize that cancer is not a mistake. It is a memory. It is a form of biological time travel. Deep within the encrypted hard drive of your DNA, buried under layers of modern code that tell you how to build a heart or a brain, lies a dormant operating system from 1 billion years ago. This is the code of the single-celled organism, the ancient ancestor that lived in the primordial soup with only one directive: survive at all costs. For over 2 billion years, before the first multicellular animal ever crawled through the mud, life existed solely as isolated, microscopic competitors. These ancient entities mastered the art of rapid replication, learned to scavenge for limited nutrients, and developed thick skins to protect themselves from a hostile environment. When evolution finally took the leap toward complex life, it did not erase this successful programming. It simply wrote new code on top of it. The instructions for building a human are essentially a series of software patches designed to silence the original, selfish operating system. We are running a fragile simulation of cooperation on top of a bedrock of absolute selfishness, and that bedrock never went away. It sits quietly in the dark corners of every nucleus, waiting for the suppression signals to fail so it can resume its original work. Scientists call this terrifying hypothesis atavism, a reversion to an ancestral type, suggesting that cancer is not a chaotic breakdown, but a highly organized retreat into the past. When a cell's modern genetic machinery is damaged by radiation, toxins, or the simple wear and tear of aging, it faces a critical choice: die or adapt. If the damage is severe enough to break the social genes but leaves the survival genes intact, the cell defaults to its oldest, most battle-tested program. It effectively boots up in safe mode, stripping away the complex functions of a liver or skin cell and reverting to the primal state of a bacteria-like survivor. It stops listening to the body's centralized command because, in its reverted state, it no longer recognizes the body as an authority figure, but rather as an environment to be conquered. This explains why cancer is so disturbingly efficient at staying alive, often seemingly smarter than the doctors trying to kill it. The tumor is not inventing new survival strategies from scratch. It is accessing a pre-existing toolkit that has been refined over eons of evolutionary warfare. These cells remember how to thrive in low-oxygen environments, a skill learned when the Earth's atmosphere was toxic to modern life. They remember how to migrate and colonize new territories, a trait we now call metastasis, which is nothing more than the ancient drive to find better feeding grounds. They even rediscover the ability to become immortal, activating enzymes that repair their DNA caps to allow for infinite division, a power that normal somatic cells voluntarily sacrificed eons ago. We often make the mistake of viewing a tumor as a confused, broken part of the body, but it is actually a distinct organism operating with terrifying clarity. It has shed the heavy, expensive machinery required to cooperate with trillions of neighbors and has become lean, mean, and singular in its purpose. It is a biological super soldier that has gone rogue, utilizing a survival logic that predates the existence of brains, hearts, or lungs. The horror lies in the realization that this is not a foreign infection invading us, but our own deep history waking up to reclaim the vessel. The cancer cell is merely doing what its ancestors did for billions of years, growing as fast as possible before something else eats it. The existence of this backup drive implies that every human body is a temporary cage for a prehistoric beast that is desperate to escape. We spend our lives accumulating damage to our genetic code, and with every scratch on a record, the probability increases that the needle will skip back to that ancient track. It is a haunting inevitability of our design that the very resilience allowing life to endure is also the mechanism that eventually destroys us. We carry the seeds of our own dissolution, encoded in the same double helix that keeps us alive, a ticking clock that counts down to the moment when a modern overlay cracks and the ancient survivor breaks through. The cell has now shed its identity as a part of you and reclaimed its identity as an independent entity. It has unlocked the ancient toolkit of survival, weapons that were forged in the fires of the early Earth. But the body does not give up easily. As the tumor begins to build its own fortifications, the body's defense grid activates, and the most brutal civil war in biological history begins. Your body is not a passive victim in this process. It is a fortress patrolled by the most efficient killers in nature. Under normal circumstances, your immune system acts as a biological surveillance state, constantly scanning for dissidents. Natural killer cells roam your bloodstream with a license to kill, executing thousands of precancerous cells every single day without you ever knowing. But the tumor you eventually notice is the one that survived the purge. It is the elite soldier that learned how to jam the radar, the spy that stole the uniform of the police force and walked right past the checkpoint. This survival is the result of a terrifying evolutionary filter known as immunoediting, a process where your own defenses inadvertently breed a stronger enemy. In the early stages of the rebellion, the immune system is highly effective, slaughtering any cell that looks obviously mutated or dangerous. But this slaughter creates a selective pressure, ensuring that the only cells left alive are the ones capable of hiding. The clumsy rebels are wiped out immediately, leaving behind a population of stealth operatives that have evolved specific mutations to mask their presence. By killing the weak, the body clears the playing field for the strong, refining the tumor into a cold, invisible threat that no longer triggers the alarms. The cancer that eventually kills you is not the first one that appeared. It is the grand champion of a microscopic gladiator tournament held inside your tissues. The primary weapon of this evolved insurgency is the exploitation of the self-identification protocols that keep your body from attacking its own organs. Every cell in your body carries a molecular ID card on its surface, a protein signal that tells the immune system, "I belong here, do not shoot." The cancer cells, having originated from your own stock, possess this ID card, but they learn to weaponize it by overproducing "do not eat me" signals that paralyze the attacking T cells. When a killer cell approaches the tumor, it is met with a chemical handshake that forces it to stand down, a biological hypnosis that renders the police force useless. This is the ultimate horror of the internal war. The enemy is not wearing a foreign uniform, so the guards lower their weapons and walk away while the sabotage continues right under their noses. Even more disturbing is the tumor's ability to actively corrupt the peacekeepers, turning the body's defenders into willing collaborators. Through a complex exchange of chemical signals, the cancer recruits immune cells like macrophages, which are supposed to eat debris and pathogens, and tricks them into working for the rebellion. These corrupted cells, often called tumor-associated macrophages, stop attacking the cancer and instead begin to protect it, releasing growth factors that help the tumor expand. They form a protective ring around the malignancy, acting as a shield against other immune attacks and actually helping the cancer cells migrate into the bloodstream. The body's security force has been bribed and brainwashed, transformed into a construction crew that helps build the very instrument of the host's destruction. Once the tumor has secured its perimeter and neutralized the local police, it turns its attention to logistics and infrastructure, hijacking the body's vascular system. A growing city of cells requires a massive amount of oxygen and glucose, far more than can be scavenged from the surrounding tissue. To solve this, the tumor secretes proteins that trick nearby blood vessels into sprouting new branches that grow directly into the cancerous mass, a process called angiogenesis. The body obediently paves a highway for its enemy, delivering a steady stream of nutrients that allows the tumor to grow at an explosive rate. This is the turning point where the rebellion becomes an entrenched occupation, a parasitic organ that is physically wired into your circulatory system, stealing the energy meant for your heart and brain to fuel its own endless expansion. The tumor has now achieved what every army desires: total control of the territory. It has silenced the police, hijacked the supply lines, and built a fortress of flesh that the body is powerless to breach. But for a creature this ambitious, conquering a single organ is not enough. It has discovered the limits of its cage, and it begins to prepare for the final, fatal stage of its evolution, the invasion of the rest of the world. At a certain point, the rebellion transforms into something far more dangerous: a colonization. The tumor decides that the organ where it was born is no longer enough to sustain its ambition. It undergoes a biological shift known as the epithelial mesenchymal transition, essentially growing legs and detaching itself from the community. It drills into the blood vessels and leaps into the roaring current of the circulatory system. This is the moment the cancer stops being a part of you and officially becomes a separate, parasitic entity hunting for new land. The journey through the bloodstream is often romanticized as a passive drift down a river, but for a microscopic cell, it is closer to a human jumping out of an airplane without a parachute into a hurricane. The circulatory system is a violent, high-pressure environment where cells are battered by the sheer force of blood flow and hunted by immune patrols that scour the highways. Most of the rebels that attempt this voyage are ripped apart by hydrodynamic shear forces or executed within minutes of entering the stream. But the few that survive are the most resilient, the most aggressive, and the most adaptable of the entire tumor population, representing a distilled concentrate of pure survival instinct. They are the seeds of a new empire, drifting through the dark tunnels of your arteries, waiting for the chance to snag onto a vessel wall and force their way into a new world. When one of these pioneers finally exits the bloodstream and lands in a distant organ, perhaps the lungs, the brain, or the bone marrow, it finds itself stranded on a hostile alien planet. The chemical environment of the brain is radically different from the breast or prostate tissue where the cell originated, meaning the invader must immediately hack the local biology to survive. It sends out chemical signals to manipulate the native cells, terraforming the new environment to suit its needs just as it did back home. This ability to thrive in foreign tissue is the final proof that the cancer has ceased to be a functioning part of a specific organ system. It has become a nomadic predator, indifferent to the specific geography of the body, viewing every organ merely as a resource-rich substrate to be exploited for growth. This radical transformation has led some evolutionary biologists to propose a disturbing theory, that aggressive cancer is not merely a disease of the body, but the birth of a new, parasitic species. The DNA of a late-stage tumor cell is often so mutated, scrambled, and rearranged that it barely resembles the human genome from which it sprang. While a normal human cell has 46 chromosomes, a cancer cell might have 60, 80, or over 100, creating a genetic profile that is as distinct from you as you are from a chimpanzee. In the case of transmissible cancers found in dogs and Tasmanian devils, the cells have actually become infectious, living independent lineages that jump from host to host like a virus. We are witnessing a speciation event in real time, where a part of the self breaks away to become a distinct organism, one that views the human body not as a home, but as a consumable host. The most chilling example of this successful speciation is the story of Henrietta Lacks, a woman who died of cervical cancer in 1951, yet whose cells are still alive and replicating today. While Henrietta was buried decades ago, the tumor cells taken from her body, known to science as HeLa cells, refused to die, continuing to divide with a ferocity that stunned researchers. Today, the total mass of HeLa cells growing in laboratories around the globe far exceeds the weight of Henrietta's actual body when she was alive. They have traveled to space, been exposed to nuclear blasts, and been infected with every virus known to man, all while maintaining their relentless drive to multiply. In a very literal sense, the cancer cells achieved what the human being could not. They liberated themselves from the constraints of a mortal lifespan and achieved biological immortality. This creates a profound philosophical horror, for if the goal of all life is to survive and reproduce, then cancer is not a failure of biology, but its ultimate triumph. These cells have solved the problem of aging by reactivating telomerase, an enzyme that rebuilds the protective caps on their DNA, allowing them to divide infinitely without genetic degradation. They have discarded the weakness of cooperation and the fragility of complex organ systems in favor of a ruthless, microscopic efficiency. We look at a tumor and see a tragedy, but nature looks at a tumor and sees a winning strategy, an organism that has managed to outsmart the death sentence written into the code of every multicellular being. It is a masterpiece of evolution, a perfect replicator that has overcome every barrier we have thrown at it, from the immune system to chemotherapy. The cancer has done what Gilgamesh and the alchemists never could. It has cheated death. It has created a biological line that can divide forever, immune to the ravages of time, growing stronger with every generation. But in its blind race toward immortality, the cancer has forgotten one simple, fatal rule of physics. It has forgotten where it lives. And so we arrive at the tragedy of the successful parasite. In its blind, furious drive to expand, the cancer has forgotten the one rule that governs all biological existence. You cannot survive if you destroy your environment. The tumor has grown so large and so demanding that it begins to bankrupt the economy of the body. It steals the glucose meant for the brain. It drains the proteins meant for the muscles. The host begins to wither away, a phenomenon doctors call cachexia, but which is really just a biological form of strip mining. The body, sensing a catastrophic energy deficit, begins to dissolve its own furniture to keep the furnace burning, breaking down skeletal muscle and fat stores in a desperate attempt to satisfy the tumor's hunger. But the cancer is an insatiable void, a black hole of consumption that absorbs every calorie while offering nothing in return. It releases inflammatory chemicals that disrupt the body's metabolism, preventing the host from effectively using the nutrients they do manage to ingest. The patient becomes a shell, not because they have stopped eating, but because the rebellion inside them is looting the supply trucks before they can reach the civilian population. The tumor does not care that the heart is weakening or that the lungs are struggling to inflate. It only cares about the immediate imperative to divide, replicating with a maniacal speed that outpaces the body's ability to support it. As the siege continues, the physical presence of the tumor begins to dismantle the very infrastructure of life. The mass expands into the delicate cavities of the chest or the skull, crushing adjacent organs and blocking the essential ducts that keep the biological machine running. It is like a sprawling, unauthorized skyscraper built in the middle of a highway, halting traffic and causing the entire city to gridlock. The liver fails to filter toxins, the lungs fill with fluid, and the kidneys shut down under the pressure of processing the cellular debris. The body's systems, which evolved over millions of years to maintain a perfect equilibrium, start to cascade into failure, one after another, like a power grid collapsing under a massive surge. The brain, the central command that once coordinated 30 trillion citizens, finds its signals fading into static as the energy reserves run dry. This is the moment where the cancer's victory transforms into a suicide pact, revealing the fatal flaw in its strategy of absolute selfishness. By defeating the immune system and outcompeting the healthy cells, the tumor has effectively sawed off the branch upon which it sits. It has treated the body as an infinite resource, a limitless frontier to be conquered, failing to comprehend that the body is a closed system with finite boundaries. The cancer has won every battle, occupied every territory, and seized every resource, but in doing so, it has guaranteed the destruction of the universe it inhabits. It is a creature of pure, present-tense instinct, lacking the foresight to see that the death of the host means the death of the parasite. Then comes the silence. The heart, exhausted and starved, beats for the final time, and the great river of blood that has fed the rebellion for months suddenly stands still. For the cancer cells deep inside the tumor, this is an apocalypse that arrives without warning. The oxygen levels plummet to zero, the glucose vanishes, and the warm, regulated environment they fought to control begins to turn cold and acidic. The immortal cells, which spent their entire existence fighting to stay alive, now find themselves trapped in a rapidly decaying corpse, surrounded by the toxins of their own making. They send out frantic chemical signals for new blood vessels, screaming into the void for resources that will never come. But the machinery that answered those calls is dead. There's a profound, dark irony in this ending, as the cancer cells die specifically because they were too good at living. They followed the prime directive of evolution, to reproduce and survive, with such ruthless efficiency that they broke the delicate balance required for complex life to exist. They represent an evolutionary dead end, a strategy that works brilliantly in the short term, but fails catastrophically in the long game. The tumor proves that unbridled growth, without regard for the system that sustains it, is not a sign of vitality, but a precursor to extinction. The rebellion ends not with a bang, but with the suffocation of the victors and the ruins of their own conquest. The cancer cells, which fought so hard to become immortal, are now trapped in a cooling, decaying world. They have conquered the entire map, only to realize there is nothing left to rule. This is the ultimate irony of their existence. They are perfect survivors who are too stupid to stop surviving. But before we judge these cells too harshly, we need to look in the mirror. Because if you zoom out from the microscope and look at the planet Earth from space, the pattern looks terrifyingly familiar. The resemblance is not merely poetic, it is mathematical. From the darkness of space, our cities glow like phosphorescent lesions spreading across the skin of the planet, connected by highways that pulse with the traffic of nutrients and resources. Just like the tumor, we have grown exponentially, ignoring the natural limits of our ecosystem, consuming everything in our path to fuel our expansion. We have cleared the forests, which function as the planet's lungs and poison the oceans, which circulate its lifeblood. And just like the host body, the Earth is beginning to react. We often discuss climate change as a political or economic problem, but biologically, it is indistinguishable from a systemic immune response. When a human body is invaded by a pathogen that reproduces too quickly, it raises its internal temperature to make the environment inhospitable to the invader. The rising global temperatures, the shifting weather patterns, and the intensification of natural disasters are the planetary equivalent of a fever. The Earth is attempting to regain homeostasis by purging the irritant that is destabilizing its systems. The floods, wildfires, and droughts are not random acts of malice from nature. They're the inflammation of a biosphere fighting for its own survival against a species that has forgotten its place in the order of things. This parallel forces us to confront a terrifying possibility regarding the silence of the universe, often referred to as the Fermi paradox. Perhaps the reason we have not encountered other intelligent civilizations is that cancer is the inevitable trap of high intelligence. It is possible that whenever a species gains the power to manipulate its environment, it inevitably defaults to the primitive drive for infinite expansion, consuming its home planet before it develops the wisdom to stop. In this grim scenario, intelligence is not an evolutionary advantage, but a self-limiting disease, a flash in the pan that burns bright and extinguishes itself by exhausting its fuel source. We might be just one of millions of civilizations that have acted out this suicidal play, currently standing at the very edge of the stage where the curtain falls. We can even see the biological parallels in our current obsession with space colonization, which mirrors the dangerous phase of metastasis. Sensing that our primary organ is failing, stripped of resources and clogged with waste, we are frantically building the technology to leap into the hostile void of space. We look to Mars and other celestial bodies as fresh tissue to be claimed, driven by the same survival instinct that pushes a cancer cell to enter the bloodstream. But if we leave Earth without curing the pathology of our behavior, we are not explorers. We are simply a spreading infection. Exporting our current model of existence to the stars does not solve the problem. It merely scales up the tragedy, turning a local disease into a galactic one. However, there is a fundamental distinction between a human being and a HeLa cell, a difference that offers a slim margin of hope. A cancer cell is a biological automaton, a slave to the chemical signals and ancient programming that dictate its behavior. It cannot look at a graph of resource depletion and understand that it is killing itself. It can only obey the blind imperative to divide. It has no concept of the host as a separate entity worthy of preservation. Nor does it possess the cognitive architecture to simulate the consequences of its actions. It drives off the cliff because it has no eyes to see the edge, operating in a perpetual, mindless present. Evolution has given us a gift that it denied to the cancer cell, the ability to see the future. We're the first entities in the history of life that can choose not to consume everything in sight. We have the power to override the ancient, selfish coding in our DNA and establish a symbiosis with the world that created us. The Earth does not need to negotiate with us. It has survived 5 mass extinctions before, and it will endure a 6th. The only question that remains is whether we will evolve into the brain of this planet or remain the cancer that forced it to start over.